Mossman, and I am here today as part of the Content with Clout series on social media and content marketing, here with my colleague Tom Gray of Denver, Colorado.
Good morning.
And we are very, very pleased to have a guest today by the name of Donna Papacosta. Donna is a writer, speaker, content marketer, podcaster, and consultant, and she helps clients communicate better with their employees, their customers, and their prospects. In 2005, Donna started producing the Trafcom News podcast, which was one of the first business podcasts in Canada. Since then, she has expanded her expertise in both social media and multimedia, and she helps people integrate these tools into their communications. As a consultant and international speaker, Donna emphasizes the importance of storytelling, content marketing, content curation, and relationship building. Donna is an active member of the International Association of Business Communicators, and she is also past chair of the IABC's Toronto chapter's Professional Independent Communicators Group. In addition, Donna is a member of the, and past president actually, of the Halton Peel Communications Association. Donna is a very unique individual in this series in that she is both a dual U.S. and Canadian citizen. She holds a master's degree in public administration from New York University and a certificate in magazine journalism from Ryerson University here in Canada. So Donna, thank you so much for joining us today and being part of the effort to raise awareness of content and what it can do for businesses.
Thanks very much, Susan and Tom, for having me. It's a great topic.
And one that you know an awful lot about. You've had a really long career, and you've done a lot of different things. And I guess one thing that we're kind of interested in is knowing what your definition of content marketing is.
Well, when I think of content marketing, I think it is relevant, interesting material that you're creating that's of interest to your clearly defined target audience. So it's not about you as a company or you as a service provider. It's information that's interesting to them. Stuff that they might be searching for when they search online, for example. So it's not salesy material. We still need traditional marketing collateral. We still need our marketing and sales material, but content marketing is not that. So it's all about the customer and his needs or her needs. It's all about the prospect and the problem that they are looking to solve. And I think that's a distinction that companies will say, well, we produce tons of content. We've got content everywhere. And I say, yes, you do. And some of it is great stuff. But if you want to talk about content marketing, what are the needs that you can solve for people when they come to your website? And then they go, oh, well, we don't do that. So, that's content versus content marketing.
So can you give us some examples of some great content that you've seen or would love to see online?
Well, the classic example is Marcus Sheridan. You're probably familiar with him. He's known now as the Sales Lion, but in 2008, he was a fellow who was digging pools for people in the U.S. And then when the recession hit, not as many people wanted to pay someone to dig a big hole in the backyard and make a pool. So he started blogging, but he didn't start blogging about what a great job he did at digging holes in backyards. He started blogging about sort of questions that people would ask if they wanted a pool. So where's the best place to locate a pool in my backyard? What's the difference between a concrete pool and a such and such pool? All those kinds of things. And guess what? Well, people started to Google those terms, and his pool business grew. Now, of course, the funny part is he also has a business as an expert on content marketing, which he is. But even in the business-to-business world, which is where I usually do my stuff, I look at American Express Open, the site that they have for geared for small business people. They produce a lot of content there. It's not about American Express. It's about topics that small business people would find interesting. So there's tons of examples. Someone's dog. I don't have one.
No, not mine.
Okay.
Dog, what dog?
Guilty as charged. So
Yeah.
there's lots of examples. I mean, on my own website, I like to produce information that's of interest to people. Yes, there's information on my website about my company and me, because if people are going to hire me, they ultimately want to know that. But early in that cycle, when they're searching for information, you want to be the one to provide that interesting content that what they're looking for.
Mhm.
The person I
And
think of, I think that's a great example about Marcus. The person I always think about, and he's kind of followed the same path, is Gary Vaynerchuk,
Yes.
who was
Fine TV,
the
yeah.
wine guy. And his
Yeah.
story was he took a successful business. He took his parents' New Jersey liquor store, which was already doing several $1 million a year in sales, maybe $10 or $11 million a year in sales, and through creating a daily wine blog and video cast and so forth, he grew that business to tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions, and then transitioned to where he's now training people on how to use social media and content marketing to kind of create authority and to create a following. So it's interesting that you know, I guess what I see a lot of is that people say, well, I can't do that. And yet you got a guy who's digging holes and now he's a guru in a few short years. And then Gary Vaynerchuk, who could have just kind of coasted with his folks' business and said, um, I think we can do something bigger here. So those are great examples.
Yeah. And you just reminded me of something, Tom. Sometimes people will say that, well, my business isn't interesting. Pools are interesting, wines are interesting, but my business, there's nothing I could think of that I could produce as content. And when people tell me that, I have a great example to tell them about. And it is a company in the US called the Indium Corporation, INDIUM. And they have, I'm not looking at my notes, I think 73 blogs, and a lot of their bloggers are engineers, and engineers are not generally known for their creative writing ability. I don't want to generalize, but most people I know who have an engineer as a partner have agreed with me, and engineers as well. Anyway, they succeeded in increasing their leads sixfold after starting all these blogs. And here's the product they sell. Are you ready? Drum roll. Solder paste. Okay? Solder paste is that stuff that you use to, I think, hook together two pieces of metal. Not really a sexy topic, but they've managed to make it because they know what their prospective clients are looking for. Now, obviously, this is for commercial purposes. We're not talking about a hobbyist who buys a tiny bit of solder paste. We're talking about industrial applications. So, I mean, if solder paste can be used for content marketing, no one has an excuse.
Well, and I also think it speaks to don't you that um, some of these. I mean, the nice thing about solder paste too is that I've got to imagine there's not a lot of competition in that space, so
Exactly.
it can be very easy or easier, let's put it that way, to gain attention by the appropriate use of content marketing and the social media channels that you distribute it through. So I have to laugh because I've got a client who specializes in what do they call it? It's called something like gorilla goo or gorilla snot or something like that. But it's the stuff that you put on the paddles when you're giving resuscitation,
Oh.
and again that's another. He owns that market because he's been creative about marketing and he gave it kind of a cute name, gorilla snot or something, which is kind of gross, but you don't forget it.
It's
So
memorable, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
No,
memorable.
you're right. Certainly, it's easier to do this stuff if you are in a niche area, and especially if you are an early adopter. Now, I don't know if other solder paste companies have upped their game in content marketing, but definitely. But that points to another thing: is really to know what your niche is. It'd be pretty difficult today, for example, to put yourself out there as a consultant, for example, as I'm a marketing consultant, general marketing for everyone. Wow, wow. How are you going to differentiate yourself and how are you going to decide on your content strategy that's so broad? So these folks who know what they do and who know what their target market is looking for definitely have an advantage. So there's a lot of thought that has to go into that.
So
which is a good. Go ahead, Susan.
I was just saying, you mentioned we've been talking mostly really about blogs here. And so, Donna, are there other types of content that you think people could be developing or curating even that might be beneficial?
Well, for sure. And the reason I'm so big on blogs is that your blog slash website, and I'm going to assume those are pretty much combined, right? That they're interconnected and related to each other. To me, a blog really is the hub of a lot of what you do. But certainly there are a lot of other ways to produce content. You mentioned earlier podcasting. I do like podcasts, and I think some of my clients certainly have used podcasts as a way to produce content as part of their content marketing efforts. It's not for everyone. So audio and video and text would be the three media, but then so what are you publishing on those media platforms? So it could be case studies, right? I love case studies, and I often will suggest to a client that we do print, PDF that's online, and perhaps an audio podcast as an interview for part of the case study. E-newsletters can be very effective for both original content and curated content that you alluded to there. So how to, very popular, and again, that can be video, that can be audio, or that can be text. You need some kind of text, even if you have video, right, for the search engines. White papers, ebooks, there's so many different things that you can do. And a lot of companies, I tell them that they probably have a lot of content, either in their electronic files or in their paper files, but it's maybe a little out of date, so it needs to be updated, or it's just a bit scattered. So if they have a plan and then they create some new stuff, take their old stuff, update it, think about how to use it best, so they don't have to start from scratch, because that's kind of scary to think, oh, we have nothing. You have something, you just don't know that it's content.
On your site, you mentioned one of my favorite ideas. You talk about on one of your posts just the answers that you give to questions asked by customers or prospects. And I often find when I'm answering a client or a prospect's question that I'm thinking, this is a blog post, this is an article, this is a podcast, this is a video. So talk about that. How do you encourage your clients and your prospects to use those kind of casual interactions as a basis for effective content?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, Tom, and we all know what the perennial topics are that our clients and prospects ask, because they call us, they email us, and they ask us in various places for answers to these questions. So just like you're saying, sometimes if I hear a question a few times, I think, that is a blog post, but then maybe it's an ebook, or maybe it's something else. Maybe it's a how-to video. Here's a perfect example of that. Very often over the past few years, I would be asked by people, Donna, I know you do podcasts, I know you do this other audio stuff. How do you record a phone call? And then they go into why they need to do it. So I'd be very nice and explain. And then after a while, I think, I'm really tired of explaining the same thing over and over again. So I made a video, I think it's like 7 or 10 minutes, whatever. And I put it up there. And sure enough, a few days later, someone calls, Donna, sorry to bother you. And it's someone I'll know from my ABC, so I'm happy to give them time. How do you record a phone call? And say, guess what? Here's a link. Watch this video. If you have any questions, I'm happy to help you. And of course, at the end of the video, it says, if you need help with your podcast, whatever. And I've actually had a couple of people contact me, prospective clients, because they watched the video, because they were looking for the information. Well, how do I record a phone call? But by the end of it, they thought, well, gee, she answered my question about how to record a phone call, but I think she knows more about podcasting than I do, so I think maybe she can help us. So it served a dual purpose of answering that need, but of course, there has to be some kind of a goal. There's got to be something in it for me too, right? Let's be honest here. We want to produce all this content. We're not, Mother Teresa. We are running businesses, so there's got to be some business purpose to it as well. But that's, to me, is a great example, the how-to, the question that you get all the time.
I'm curious about, I have a question about podcasts. We all know that, or maybe we don't all know that, but my advice to people when they do video is to set up a YouTube channel and then house it there, and you can also use Vimeo or other providers, and then embed it in your site so that you have it. You have the power of YouTube, which is the world's second largest search engine, which a lot of people don't realize, working for you. And then you also have the ability to display it on your site as well. But what about podcasts? When you record your podcast, do you house them elsewhere and then bring them in, or do you just house them? Do you just deliver them through your site, or does it kind of depend? For example, iTunes and
yeah, there's a few different ways to do it. I mean, there's probably a million ways. If you ask podcasters, they'll all have a different answer. But there's two things really involved. One is where your physical MP3 file lives, where it's hosted. And then the second part is how are you distributing that podcast to your audience from that place where it is housed. And for a lot of us, the platform that podcasters find very helpful and wonderful is called Libsyn, Libsyn.com. It stands for Liberated Syndication, I think. So Libsyn. So for example, in my case, and in many of my clients' cases, I will upload my podcast there. But then what that gives me is both an embed code and a direct link. So then I will publish my podcast on my own blog, where people can either listen right away through a player, an HTML5 player, so not Flash. We don't want to do Flash anymore. Or they can download it if they choose, or they can subscribe through iTunes. So my podcast is also available through iTunes, and I suggest to all my clients, if they are publishing a podcast for the public, to make it available on iTunes as well, so that people can subscribe and automatically get each issue. So there's two different things. There's the hosting and there's the distribution, but you do want to make it available. So after you put it on your site/blog, you also want to tweet it and tell people on G+ and LinkedIn and anywhere else that you have a social presence, for example, because social media is such a great way to amplify your content marketing efforts.
Donna, what do you like about podcasting? It's not something that I've delved into a whole lot, and I know that's something you are quite an expert at. What is it about podcasting that you think is a really great form of content?
Well, Susan, to me, it's the warmth. There's a warmth to that human touch of audio. When I am at the gym and I'm listening to one of my favorite podcasts for immediate release, the Hobson and Holtz Report. Now, I happen to know Shell Holtz and Neville Hobson, the hosts, but I didn't meet them until after I started listening to the podcast. But when I listen to them, they're in my earbuds. It's almost a personal thing. And of course, they use nice microphones, so they sound good, and they're really smart people, so the content is great. And I'm listening, and it just feels personal. And plus, I'm learning. I love podcasts because they help me to learn as well. So as a listener, I feel good. I'm at the gym, yes, and I'm exercising, which is a good thing, but now I'm also exercising my brain. But it's that human touch of audio. And I can be, as I said, doing something else while I'm listening. From the producer's point of view, why would a producer produce podcast as content? Again, there are people who like to learn or who like to experience something by listening. It's not for everyone. I know people who say they just won't listen. They'll only listen maybe to comedy or something like that, and that's their prerogative. But I really do enjoy it both as a producer and as a listener. And a lot of my clients find that they do want to provide multimedia content because sometimes they do it just because they feel they should. Everyone tells them to do multimedia, and podcasting often fits well into that model. So. And I can go on for hours talking about podcasting. Sure.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have hours, but we could probably listen to you for hours. So this whole notion of where content comes from, you talked about earlier that in our archives and in our files and so forth, if we've been in business for any length of time, we probably have tons of content that's available. But do you have to create, does all your content, does it all have to be creative? Does it all have to be unique? Or can you, what's a strategy? Because it can seem overwhelming, I think, to a lot of businesses to be faced with having to create new content all the time.
Right, that's true. And I'm a big proponent of content curation. And so using both original content and curated content as part of your content marketing efforts. And what curation is finding, selecting, organizing, and sharing the best of relevant content. So it doesn't just mean going out there, searching for a keyword, grabbing everything and dumping it out. It means finding stuff that's interesting and sharing it with your audience in an organized way. So for example, every morning I produce a couple of newspapers. Well, they're obviously not really newspapers, but I use the content platform called Paperly, paper.li. And two of them are for groups that I belong to, do this as a volunteer, and a couple are from my own business. And so I will find interesting content and it gets published in this paper. But what Paperly does for me is it automates it to a slight degree. So it'll go out there and choose content from Twitter based on parameters I have set up. But then as an editor, as a curator, I can tweak it before it gets published. So if there's an article that sneaks in there about the Kardashians, for example, I will kill it before the paper goes out. Just personal.
Thank you.
Public service for you all.
We very much appreciate that.
There's other reasons, there's other reasons for either promoting something or pushing it down, whatever. So it's a very simple way for me to curate and share content. But otherwise, I will do so through my blog and my newsletter. And I encourage my clients to do that too. And I have a whole process that I walk them through. In fact, that's what I'm doing tomorrow for a client, is show them how to find that great content and how to best organize it and share it. And then they get known not just through search engine optimization for doing this, but also in their industry. It helps them to be known as thought leaders, because I really believe that you can be a thought leader if you are curating, as long as you are also producing original content. People know you as the person who knows that stuff.
How does that all fit in with social media, Donna? How do you see the interplay between content and social media?
Social media is a fantastic way to amplify all this content. So you're out there and you're creating content, you're curating content, you have this fantastic website, and if you're only relying on people finding you through search, which you hope they're doing because you're optimizing, but there's so many other outlets out there, and of course social, by using Twitter, by using Google Plus and LinkedIn and perhaps Facebook for business as well, you can find a whole new world of people who are hungry for the kind of content that you produce. And I have found that so many times where even podcasts, I mean, this blows my mind. I've been podcasting since 2005, as you mentioned. Some of the podcasts from 5 and 6 years ago are still being downloaded because people are searching for them. And sometimes I see people linking to them in social media, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I almost wish you wouldn't link to that. It's so old. But, things are still being shared because someone else has put them on a list of things to listen to, right? And certainly some content is evergreen. Other times things do get a little dated, but I think social media is just a great way to amplify your content. Where some people err is on the other side. They set up the social media presence without the content. You probably have the same experience where people ask you, well, can you help me get set up on that Twitter thing, or can you get me a Facebook? And you say, okay, well, what are you going to publish? Publish? What am I, a publisher? Yes, you are a publisher. So you need to have that strategy of knowing what you're going to publish via your social media. Because if your social media is all about me, people get tired of that pretty quickly.
So you talked a little bit about the process you walk people through. What are some of the, as a content marketer or pursuing a content marketing strategy, what are some of the best practices that I should, for example, follow? And how do I do this?
Well, I think part of it is, I think part of it is really knowing your audience and knowing what it is that they are hungry for. Because as I said earlier, you want to be the one to help them solve their problems. So you need to know what their problems are, right? The other thing is not trying to do everything, sort of have a focus. And of course, an editorial plan or a content plan is always a good thing, where you sort of scoped out over the next year. I don't do it for a year, but say over the next 6 months, what is it that you want to cover? What kind of content can you share? So that there's some logical progression through it, so that it makes sense to someone who discovers it. As I mentioned, look through your files to find out what you already have. Don't reinvent the wheel every time, because that content certainly is there. think about using multimedia. To me, that is another best practice. And be sure when you do share your content that you make it easy for others to share. And it's funny, but I will be on someone's blog and I'll think, oh, that's a great article, and I want to retweet it. And they don't have it set up that I can do that. And no one wants to copy a URL anymore. It's way too much work, you know? Copy and paste. Oh, we can't do that. We want the one click, right? So give people the one click, tweet, like, whatever it is, and let them have that capability. I think people are going to lose the ability to copy and paste a URL someday. I don't know. It's like, I don't know. It makes me laugh sometimes. But yet I'll see a really great post that doesn't make it easy for me to share it. So make it easy for people to share it. And make sure that you're using social media to amplify both your original and your curated content. So, and of course, what I didn't say was in the very beginning when I said it talked about knowing your audience and knowing what your goal is as well, and making sure that your strategy is aligned with that goal. And in the end, you have to have a way to measure your success. So when you're measuring the success of your content marketing efforts, yes, you can look at numbers, you can look at click-throughs and all that stuff. But in the end, if you were trying to get new leads, did you get new leads, right? You can get 1,000 retweets, but did it move the needle in some way? Now, if your only goal was retweets, you're great. But I think most of us as business people need to have a bigger goal than just those numbers.
So you talk about social media, and I was just doodling around a little bit before this interview began, and made a list. So Facebook, Google+, Twitter, Pinterest, Yelp, TripAdvisor, Reddit, Dig, Delicious, YouTube, iTunes, SlideShare, Libsyn. So what, as a business owner, where do I focus? I mean, you'd love to be everywhere, but you can't. You have finite resources, and probably some resources are better than others. So how do I learn? How do I find out where I should be, the essential social media channels that I should be paying attention to?
Well, I think it's certainly true that you can't be everywhere. Even if you have a large team, you can do that. But most of us, I think, that we're talking to today are probably not in that position. So first of all, where is your audience, right? A lot of my clients are not on Google+, but a lot of my peers are. So I'm on Google+ mainly because I can communicate with my colleagues there. I'm probably not going to meet too many prospects, although that will change. Twitter, on the other hand, I do find a lot of my clients and prospects are there. So it's very important for me to be on Twitter. Plus, I use Twitter as a learning platform. So part of it is knowing where your audience is. The other is simply just focusing on a few just because you can't focus on them all. Others will feel more comfortable to you. And so maybe you should be there because it just feels like the right place for your content. It fits in well. And in some cases, something like SlideShare, to me, every business should be there, especially business to business, because it is a phenomenal way to share content and so easy to do. I've had a couple of presentations that I put on there. One I put on as an afterthought because I was speaking at an international conference, and my slides weren't particularly pretty because I had to use the format that the conference organizers wanted, the association. So as an afterthought, I put my slides there, and they happened to be about content curation. And I just was able to tweet out the link just to say, if you want my slides, there they are. And I didn't think they were that great, as I said, because the way they looked, and also because I wasn't there to talk about them. I didn't add an audio track. I just put the slides up. A few weeks later, I happened to notice some retweets, and I said, I'll just go look at SlideShare and see if anyone has downloaded that or looked at it. 10,000. Now it's up to 18,000 views, and I thought, I didn't even promote that thing. So it just shows you if you have content that people perceive as good, and I mean, there was some good stuff in there for sure, they will find it and they will share it. So here I was just putting it up as an afterthought. Now I have more of an idea of when I put stuff on there, and I think more about it, and sometimes I will add audio and all that. So it's just interesting to sort of find the place that feels right to you, but also to be certainly aware of where your audience might be out there looking for information, where they hang out on social media.
If you could give one piece of advice, Donna, to people who are maybe are just starting out in the social media content marketing journey, what would it be? What do you think is the essential piece of information you can impart?
Well, I would say it is to have a focus and a strategy from the very beginning and not to be scattershot and to put the time into planning. Sometimes planning isn't fun. We want to just jump in. But I think in this case, it is important to plan ahead and know why you're doing this and then scope out how you're going to do it and then how you're going to measure the success of your efforts.
And of course, you can advise people on that type of project, the planning part as well, I'm sure.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I, for one, have really appreciated your insight and your expertise, Donna. We appreciate you spending the time with us. Can you tell us a little bit about your business and how you work with and what you offer to your clients?
Sure. Well, I offer help for them really to how they can share their stories. And mostly it's in the business to business world. So it might be sharing their stories through web content, through articles and newsletters, and also through multimedia like podcasting, as I mentioned. Also helping them to use social media to amplify their content. So it's sharing the story, incorporating their stories in a way that's engaging to people, and then of course adding that content marketing, which is not about them but about how to solve problems for their clients, and then using social media to build awareness of this. So sometimes it's helping them to just get a plan in place and figure out how to do it, because it's all well and good. I do a workshop on hands-on social media where we really do tactics, and it's full day of tactics, which is great. And if you're going to be doing your own social media, you need to do that. But we always talk about having the strategy ahead of that to know why you're doing it, because otherwise you're just going to be spinning your wheels and wasting a lot of time. So as I said, I often work with people, whether it's written material or audio podcasting and sometimes other multimedia, just to help them to get that story out there, because every company has a great story to tell. Sometimes it's hidden under jargon, sometimes it's hidden under business speak, because we think we have to talk about mission statements and all that. And I have to say that many times to them, no one really cares about your mission statement. As far, inside the company, yes, but the outside world, I want to know, how can you solve my problem? Don't give me your history of your company from 1842. I'm not interested.
And do you have ways people can be working with you, Donna? I think you mentioned you have a workshop coming up. I'm sure it's not the only one, but...
Well, the one I have coming up is in Toronto, so obviously that doesn't work for everyone, but it's in Toronto on November 21st, and that's a hands-on social media workshop all day, and we will cover all the major social media tools. If they go to my website, trafcom.com, so that's TRAF, like Frank, com.com. So it's Trafalgar Communications, trafcom.com, and there I will list any upcoming workshops, webinars, whatever. And there's some content there too. Of course, that content is always being revised, and there will be some fresh stuff coming up next week. So.
Wonderful.
And I would advise, I spent a little time on your site, and you have a lot of great, I don't know, over 100 podcasts episodes. Is that correct? I'm not sure how you number them.
115, I think. I don't know. I lost count. But,
and some really interesting guests that you interview and talk about. So I would recommend that people spend some time listening to Donna as long as they're at her site. So again, thank you so much for spending time with us, and it's just been a pleasure, and I learned something too. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Donna.
I just thought of one more thing. There is actually a report on my site, a content marketing report. I think it's about 8 pages, and if you, I think it's on the right side, you'll see it's in blue, content marketing report. People have to just give their email address, and they can download the report. So people say it's pretty useful. But thanks for having me today. I really
Thank you, Donna. So much appreciated.